So Ukrainian forces have almost been pushed entirely out of Kursk, and there's a real chance that Russian forces try to ride that momentum and create a buffer zone inside of Ukraine. So give you an idea of the area we're looking at here, looking at deep state map. We're going to start the focus today in the Kursk pocket, and we will move down to Toretsk, where there's been possibly some Ukrainian advances in recent days. I'm going to back this out to the 9th. This was the day that Russia, a little over a week ago, kicked off the major offensive operation to really try to close out the Kursk pocket. Now, something I think is worth stressing right now is the Ukrainian forces are not and have not been surrounded in this pocket, but they are losing territory at a pretty rapid pace. Now, one of the reasons I like Deep State Map as a tool is because they have this time lapse. So we're going to run a time lapse here starting on the 9th, moving to today, Monday, March 17th, and you'll see how pretty quickly Russia pushed the Ukrainians down, all the way back to pretty close to the border, all things considered. Now, there's no way to look at what's happening in Kursk right now and present this as some sort of Ukrainian victory. The fact that they were in Russia for as long as they were definitely raised a lot of concerns inside of Russia, possibly pulled troops from other areas of the front, and if nothing else, was a major thorn in the side for Putin and key Russian leadership as they began kind of the first level of negotiations with the new Trump administration to bring about an end to the war. Now, in looking at this pocket as it's closed out, a lot of footage in the last couple days coming from Russia, very little coming from Ukraine for what it's worth, but that tends to be what we see in situations like this. When Ukraine is advancing rapidly, it's when Ukraine moved into Kursk the first time, it was all Ukrainian footage and nothing coming from Russia. Now it's the exact opposite. So we've got a lot of footage of Russian forces moving into areas like Sudza that were long occupied, in this case, by Ukrainian forces. We have seen a fair amount of Ukrainian equipment captured, destroyed, and some captured. We've got at least an M777 howitzer, a 155 millimeter howitzer provided by the United States. That appears to be captured. Some of the footage looked like it might have been pretty beat up, but either way, a lot of Russian pictures and videos alongside that. For whatever reason, that was like the prized capture. I saw more footage of this one towed howitzer than just about anything else, which was interesting. But nonetheless, clearly that fighting position, that firing point, was, I wouldn't say overrun. It doesn't look like there was an actual fight at that position, but it does look like the Russians got there so fast that Ukrainian forces were not able to exfil the area. And when you're looking at a towed piece of artillery like that, one of the challenges with that equipment, of course, is that it cannot just drive away from the firing point. So it's entirely possible that the vehicle was used to do something else or in another location, or maybe even they loaded it up full of troops and other equipment and didn't have time to attach the howitzer. But either way, we've also seen Bradleys, tanks, a lot of MAT-Vs, a lot of Humvees, a lot of Western equipment being taken by the Russians right now. And there's some talk on Russian channels that they're planning on putting together another kind of Western display to show all of the equipment they've captured in the war zone. Now, one of the concerns right now in Kursk, as again, looking at the map, it's a real possibility that this pocket gets closed out entirely sometime in the next week or two. Most of what we're hearing from Ukraine is that it's a sort of rearguard action, a controlled retreat. There's not a lot of value in Ukraine holding some of this territory in here. There's nothing really there. So if they have, viable defensive positions, it's one thing, but it's hard to tell at this point that some of the trench lines in this area are really worth holding on to versus moving back into Ukrainian territory where they have been able to build up some more substantial defenses in recent days. In fact, to that, we've started to see some footage from inside of Ukraine in this Sumy area just across the border where they're starting to build up their defenses, trench lines, dragon's teeth, barbed wire, pillboxes. We're actually seeing some anti-drone nets being put up along the roads. This is something that we've seen both sides utilize more and more. It's kind of like the best way to protect against drones, because even with electronic warfare on the back of any number of vehicles, there are gaps and there are times where it doesn't work. And then, of course, you've got the fiber optic drones where electronic warfare jammers don't do anything at all. So we've seen this long used by Russia in certain portions along the eastern portion of the front, but now we're starting to see Ukraine using that as well in Sumy. And again, this is an area where if we look at the map, it's not out of the question right now, and some Russian sources have talked about this, that they may try to create a bit of a buffer zone inside of Ukraine. Now, a similar comparison here might be down in Kharkiv. If you recall, quite a while ago, actually, that's essentially what Russia did here. There was talk at the time that maybe they were trying to push on to the city of Kharkiv. They did make some progress for a little while. Eventually, I think it was the Ukrainian 3rd Assault Brigade came in and pushed them back and eventually stopped this assault. But by and large, what Russia did here is they're referring to as a buffer zone, that red territory being Russian, green or Russian-controlled territory inside of Ukraine. The green is previously controlled by Russia, since retaken by Ukraine. So this buffer zone concept is definitely in the cards for Kursk right now. And I think we're seeing a lot of planning on both the Russian and the Ukrainian side for that eventuality if Russia were to push across this border into Ukraine. We'll see. There definitely would be some arguments inside of Russia for that to happen. More concern that Ukraine might continue to shell some of these areas in Kursk. And now, of course, they've seen a successful operation pushing across the border and capturing Russian territory for 7 months. It's not out of the realm of possibility that Russia would want to do whatever they can to try to close that off. Now, turning back to another area along the front that started to get some attention the other day and then kind of fell off is Toretsk in the southeastern portion of Ukraine. And look, big picture, the battlefield is trending in Russia's direction. When we're talking about the changes of territorial control, the casualty question is always tricky. In most cases, we would say that the attacking force is probably going to lose more men and equipment than the defending force. But when you have something like we just saw in Kursk, where it happens very, very fast, sometimes that ratio can get skewed. And of course, we saw a lot of Ukrainian equipment get lost in the defense. It's still kind of up in the air as to how many forces Russia lost actually trying to close out that pocket. But nonetheless, while Russia was focusing up on Kursk, we did see Ukraine seemingly kick off a attack down in Toretsk in the eastern portion of Ukraine. So a bit of to orient you a bit here to the map, we've got here Bakhmut, massive meat grinder a couple of years ago. A little further south is Pokrovsk. This is an area that Russian forces have been closing in on for some time now. Toretsk right here is where there was reportedly some Ukrainian counterattacks in recent days, but I'm going to go back to this time lapse. I don't see it much at all, and more of what I'm hearing now is that it wasn't necessarily a Ukrainian counterattack as much as it was just some of these gray zones were still being fought over. So we'll see very little territorial control in and around Toretsk, and to see really anything at all, I think by the end here we end up seeing some minor Russian advances in this general area. But there has been a lot of talk about Toretsk, and I just want to spend some time here because it did seem like there might have been something coming from the Ukrainian side down here. Right now, I don't think we can say that's happening. The fighting might have intensified. There might be more losses by the Russians trying to move forward around Toretsk. But the idea that, if we go back maybe a month, if we go back to February 1st, you can see that, really since then, Russia has taken some of that territory. They haven't really lost any area in Toretsk, minor areas on the outskirts. So anyways, when you do hear anything about the possibility of a Toretsk counteroffensive, Ukraine pushing them back, I would say there might not be a lot to that right now. Now, the reason all of this is important is, of course, today, Monday, March 17th, 2025, U.S. President Trump said that he's planning to speak to Russian President Vladimir Putin either today or tomorrow, and they're going to talk about this war. And a couple of the key areas he says he's going to talk about is territorial control. Kursk, this pocket up here that Russian forces have been closing out, that's going to be on the table, as is territorial control. And the territorial control that Russia is talking about in this context, let me close out this calendar piece here, is going to be, they already have Crimea, but Kherson, Zaporozhye, Donetsk, and Luhansk. And these are areas that are not entirely under Russian control right now, and that's worth knowing as we wait to hear what comes out of this Trump-Putin meeting. The reason I say that is when you hear people talk about, well, what about freezing the front lines and just stopping where it is right now? So as an example, if we froze the front lines right now, nothing would change in Crimea, right? It's all under Russian occupation, no big difference there. For some of Kherson, there wouldn't be much of a change either, but you have to keep in mind that part of Kherson is across the river, and Russian forces aren't there. They were there at one point. They were pushed out by the Ukrainians, so seizing the front line would cut that oblast in half. Same with Zaporozhye. You can see here, the area sticking out here to the north, this white portion, is under Ukrainian control, Ukrainian territory under Ukrainian control, and then a big portion here of Donetsk is still not taken by the Russians. So freezing the front lines would, of course, leave some of this territory in Russian hands and some in Ukrainian hands, which might sound like a viable option. However, a while ago, Russia held referendums saying that all of this territory is legally under the Russian flag. So to freeze the front lines along their current location would mean Russia ceding some territory that they believe is legally theirs back to Ukraine, which is might be a sticking point and something we have to keep in mind as we hear what comes out of those meetings. But again, thought it was worth running through real quick what the front lines look like today. Again, Ukraine is rapidly losing territory in Kursk. A lot of videos from the Russian side there. Doesn't look like much happening in and around Toretsk, and we're waiting to hear more about the Trump-Putin meeting. But that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.